Hi, my name's Tessa Darbyshire. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you all. I wanted to say thank you to the organisers for the invitation to speak today. I'm really looking forward to the workshops later as well, and the ethical cards will be fantastic. So my talk was originally titled Ethical Algorithm Design and Ethical Use of Data. And I looked at it and I thought, that's fantastic. So I worked up my notes in a great detail and I ran through it with a friend on Zoom in the hope of glowing feedback so we could open the wine. Instead, she tilted her head and she said, "Oh, it's interesting, Tess, but isn't ethics a bit, well, ooh, my presentations are sharing, nebulous." And do you know, she had a really good point. Ethicists tend to presume that everyone in the audience was reading their Kierkegaard in the bath last night, but really, people who aren't working in the field tend to regard ethics in its academic incarnation as a little like Andromeda. It will collide with us at some point, but if we're really lucky, it won't be for another 4.5 billion years. Now, I would love to be able to denounce all charges of fuzziness in defense of my fellow ethicists, but sometimes you overhear conversations that go a little bit like this. Excuse the drawings, I did them on paint yesterday. I've paraphrased a little. How can I update my ethical approach to technology using insights from the social scientists? Now, this is a great question, and lots of people are asking it at the moment, because there's lots of studies into how machine learning and the decades of social sciences interact. But occasionally, in response to this very sensible question, you get answers like this. Well, my approach is inspired by post-phenomenological and new materialist understandings of the onto-epistemological dimensions of human data assemblages. And I really believe that I would need an encyclopedia to get through that. And this remark is by no means in isolation. Ethics in this scholarly guise can be a little slippery, a little jargonful, and not very interpretable. So what can we do about that? I believe that if we step away from the hallowed halls of classical ethics, we can perhaps formulate something that's a little more tangible, that's grounded in how people behave in the present. So how can we talk about ethics in the context of practical applications? In this presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 facets of ethics. So it's a little bit like an inversion of Michelle's talk, where it was law in its various guises. We're going to discuss ethics as scientific rigor, ethics as acting within the law, and ethics as societal impact. I've picked these because they're applicable to data scientists across domains and sectors, and each is covered by well-established best practice that we can utilize in this discussion. And that's really what I'm going to draw on, and really what the main message of this talk is that these structures exist already, and whilst new developments, new legislation is changing the way we handle challenges in the ethics of data science, the structures that dictate how we behave exist in many of the fields we're going to discuss. So first, we're going to do ethics as scientific rigor. In the world of academia, it is widely accepted that every researcher has a responsibility to plan and publish research which is scientifically rigorous, reliable, and reproducible. The scientific community, and I'd say this as a journal editor, we benefit from this when it's highlighted as a commitment in published work, because it provides a coherent body of knowledge for future research. And this applies at every stage of the research lifecycle, including research design, data collection and pre-processing, analysis methods and interpretation, and theorizing. This is irrespective of domain, and I can't reiterate enough what both Zosia and Michelle said about the importance of planning early. So that particularly is what the purpose of research design is encompassing a clear research question and a description of the problem or opportunity that motivates the work with reference to the existing literature in the relevant field. And that really is about getting those things pinned down right at the beginning, because what we see a lot is tacked on ethical statements, patchworks of ethical citations included at the end, and it really is key to get that stuff in at the research design stage. Ooh, I went forward one. Data collection covers the requirement to clearly outline the methods used in collecting and pre-processing certain data. This, for us, includes frank discussions of the advantages and limitations of the collection process and the management of the collected data in adherence to principles such as FAIR, so ensuring that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Analysis methods refers to techniques used to extract insights from the data and the expectation that the choices made be justified with reference to the research question, existing literature, and relevant benchmarks or baselines. You'll see me using that phrase a lot with reference to the research question and existing literature, because it really is the core of scientific rigor, is that connection to other structures. Interpretation and theorizing represents the requirement upon researchers to ensure that all claims they make are supported, highlighting clearly which features are being used to generate insights, recommendations, or predictions. Now, for the purposes of data science research, I would argue that these amount to an ethics of a sort. The result of adhering to the principles of scientific rigor is a body of scientific knowledge which can act as a foundation for advances in technology that change the way we live our lives. And that's whether you're developing a facial recognition algorithm, a protein folding algorithm, or a novel renewable energy technology. The infrastructure for scientifically rigorous research is well embedded across domains, and in pursuit of a practical ethics, I would suggest that it can and should be used as a foundation. Next, we'll look at ethics as acting within the law. Don't worry, I'm not going to discuss the GDPR because Michelle did a sterling job of that earlier. What I do want to do is address what Michelle said about accountability being the kicker in lots of these discussions. At the moment, there are vast multitudes of papers and publications discussing this key question about who is accountable for automated decision-making. And then there are papers covering options from the algorithm itself, so the user, the developer, the regulator, the sponsor. And then there are also papers on the questions raised by this discussion, such as how do we attribute responsibility, particularly if the decisions are made by a system which cannot easily explain the decision-making process. And these are extremely complex questions, and the volume of scholarly and governance work on the subject reflects this. Again, I defer to the specialist knowledge of Michelle in terms of the particular legislative pieces. However, I really would like to highlight the work by Professor Joanna Bryson at the Hertie School of Governance. With regard to the questions surrounding the explainability of a given process, she holds that we do not need to completely understand how a machine learning algorithm works to regulate automated decision-making, any more than we need to completely understand the physics of torque to regulate bicycle riding in traffic. In this analogy, there are complex roles and responsibilities played by all stakeholders, the cyclist, the bike manufacturer and merchant, nearby motorists and pedestrians, the local council, the legislator, the list goes on. And similarly, the web of responsibility in development and deployment of algorithmic systems and data science more broadly as it reaches application is complex, but can be regulated without needing complete transparency of the system itself. And she goes on to rule out any assignment of responsibility to the system in its own right. There's a big discussion about whether AI in particular and general AI as a focus can be accountable in its own right. And she says this, the issue should not be embedding our intended or asserted values in our machines, but rather ensuring our machines allow firstly the expression of the mutable intentions of their human operators, and secondly, transparency for the accountability of those intentions in order to ensure or at least govern the operator's morality. And I would like to push like Michelle, a book, this is the Oxford Handbook of Ethics for AI, and I can't recommend it enough. It's an excellent doorstop. In the earlier analogy, we want to be able to assess that the manufacturer of the bike did not intend for an accident to occur in traffic, and that they did their due diligence in averting the outcome. And the same can be said of the cyclist. We want to say that they didn't deliberately cause the accident and that they were following the laws that were set. We cannot reasonably claim to ensure the morality of either the makers or the cyclist, but we can govern it based on the outcome of their actions. Again, we can see here that there are extensive existing infrastructures, such as independent audits, requirements for due diligence and recourse, and the courts process, which can act as a solid foundation for practical ethics. We will need, going forward, legislation that specifically focuses on the opportunities and pitfalls of these evolving technologies, building on the GDPR and the DPA and the FOI. But the core principles of responsibility remain the same. This is a technology that humans have built, that humans are responsible for, and it's every day we take those responsibilities into consideration. You know, I do plenty, and I'm sure many of you do, of office training hours on what it means to behave ethically within your company. And those issues are very similarly applied in this context. Finally, I think I'm whipping through, but I'm going to cover ethics as societal impact. And unfortunately, this is where the fuzziness that we spoke about at the beginning creeps back in. The impact and the response to it depend on many factors, including location, time, culture. In the UK this year, students took to the streets to protest the algorithm that assigned them exam grades in lieu of taking exams during the pandemic. In many cases, the assigned grades were weighted heavily by the past performance of the school rather than the teacher's predictions. And this resulted in high-performing pupils being given much lower than their expected grades. The government reversed the decision after a short time, but the pupils on the streets weren't shouting fairness, accountability, transparency, ethics. So they were protesting the persecution of students from poor areas, classism, and lost university places. Those real tangible impacts of decisions about data science and algorithmic processing. So I would argue that researchers and developers are responsible for considering their work in the social context, despite the shifting goalposts that characterize discussions in this area. In terms of a practical interpretation of this, it's really useful to turn to the guidelines that are being produced by organizations all over the world and in every domain. As Michelle mentioned, the EU are working on this, and the UK are developing national data strategies. And the UN is working to develop guidelines for ethical AI, and those things are currently in discussion series. But equally, conferences, domain-specific ones, such as NeurIPS, require every paper to include a social impact statement. And journals, such as Nature Medicine, the BMJ, and the Lancet, are working to develop domain-specific guidelines that govern the publication of research in their area. You'll have seen that announcement about the 3 journals working together to extend Consort and Spirit so that the medical legislation covers the use of artificial intelligence. It's really easy to say that some applications have a clearer social impact than others, so that use of AI in healthcare has a really clear and direct impact on individuals, and that not all data science is artificial intelligence, but all data can and should be placed in the context of its life cycle from collection through use. And in terms of practical ethics or ethics in practice, I would really recommend seeking out the groups developing guidelines applicable to your specific research area. I'm going to start to wind up today with a quote on this from Deb Raji at the AI Now Institute. And she wrote that there's no such thing as flattering stereotypes, only flattening stereotypes. The strong Black woman, the math genius Asian, it is an inherent insult to crush full and complex human beings into the 1 or 2 dimensions one chooses to see. Yet this is the entire goal of data science. On the internet, the world is flat. For reality to be computable, it must lose dimensions. The definition of dynamic, complicated objects, including and especially humans, collapses into inputs for operations and analysis. I'd like to refer back to what Michelle described as the inherent tension between minimization and privacy. So if you are minimizing your data within the law for the purpose of retaining privacy, are you minimizing it too far? Is that data fit for purpose in understanding the nuances of people? I know that's specifically a human data example, but I think that that argument holds because data really is reductionist, and working out whether those reductions leave you with something that can work is a really important question. And so what I'd ask is that you consider the data you leave out as carefully as that which you include. And I really hope to see papers submitted to us that include discussions about these types of topics. Speaking of Deb, just at the end there, I'd just like to flag that it's Black in Data Week at the moment. And I'd like to highlight the work of these 4 fantastic scholars. So Deb Raji at the AI Now Institute, Joy Bulamwini at MIT, Abeba Burhane at Dublin, and Timnit Gebru at Google Ethical AI. I've pulled these 4 for no other reason than they have been doing high profile work recently. And I've worked closely with them and admire their work, but I'd really recommend that if you want to go and dig deeper into the murky depths of AI ethics and data science ethics, that you go and read these people and cite their work. And the Black in Data Week conference runs to tomorrow, and there's a data justice session then. So please do get involved. It's a fantastic initiative. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to my whistle-stop tour of practical ethics. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to any questions. And thank you again for the invitation to speak today.